Hello, El Paso. This is Philosophic Dialogues from La Frontera, where we have fun with the big questions in life. And this season, we've been focusing on raising questions about beauty and aesthetics. And today, we're really happy to have with us Dr. Max Grossman. Dr. Max Grossman is a specialist of medieval and Renaissance architecture and urbanism in Italy. He conducted research in the history of art in Tuscany for 7 years before completing his Ph.D. at Columbia University. He's currently Associate Professor of Art History at the University of Texas at El Paso and Director of its Study Abroad program in Rome. His most recent book is a co-edited volume on the art and architecture of the Roman feudal nobility in the Renaissance, Building Family Identity, the Orsini Castle of Bracciano from Fiefdom to Duchy. Duchy? Duchy. 1470 to 1698. Since arriving in El Paso in 2009, Dr. Grossman has developed a second field of interest, the architecture and history of the West Texas region, from the Native American period through World War II. He's recently submitted a book for publication called El Paso Architecture, and his edited volume on the Mescalero Apaches of El Paso and the Borderlands region will come out in 2024. He also serves on the board of directors of Preservation Texas, the leading preservationist organization in Texas, and as vice chair of the Trust Society in El Paso, whose mission is to formulate and implement strategies for protecting the architectural heritage of El Paso while promoting the economic development of the historic districts of both the city and county. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. It's good to see you both.
Yeah. I'm tempted to go to the architecture questions right away, but we'll start with the list.
Start light, then get to the heavy
We'll
stuff.
get into the nitty gritty, and it is nitty gritty when you talk about architecture in El Paso, I think. But the first question that we have is, and it's the focus we've been focusing on this. What do you understand about beauty? When you're an art historian, and you've probably thought about this a bit. So what is beauty to you? Is it a philosophical area, an experiential area? Do you have a pet theory about beauty?
I do. My notion of beauty, I think, is very traditional in the Western sense, deeply rooted in Plato, and then continuing through the Western tradition, through St. Augustine, Kant. I'm one of these people.
What does that mean?
If we think about artists, for example, who express beauty, Plato tells us in the Symposium that artists are like prophets, who are able to express ideal beauty, which is related to truth and virtue in Western thinking, and to give it tangible form, to communicate a sublime message. And I actually believe that. I believe that beauty is something that exists in itself, independently of what humans think of it or are able to perceive of it. It's also, I think, linked very closely, to my faith as a Jew. I do believe that there is a God, that there is an order to things, much like the Greeks did in their paganism, and that beauty, in a certain sense, is also inseparable from that. It's a divine thing, beauty. Hard to describe in words. I think Plato, in his dialogues, came closest. But it is a concept I've struggled with my entire life. I think almost anybody who is in a field like mine that focuses on beauty or aesthetics is forced to think about it a lot. My belief in its existence as something in itself separate from us has been reinforced over the years. My beliefs have really become more solid with time. I'm less likely to question them.
I'm already going to get off track here, if you don't mind.
No, go
So,
ahead.
because you
Whether
brought up...
I mind or not. That's just what happens.
You brought up your Jewish background, and I teach Jewish philosophy, and I've been working in this field for a long time. So I know there's in the history of Judaism, unlike in Christianity and some other traditions, and pagan traditions, Greek and Roman traditions, there's a peculiar sense of aesthetics and what counts for beauty in the Jewish tradition. Like there's a beautiful synagogue service, you can have that, right? And I've seen some, beautiful Torah scrolls. They're just beautiful, right? But my question to you is, from your Jewish background, is the phenomenon of beauty then something that is not readily expressed or expressible, like the name of God or something?
I think
along those lines. I mean, is it an idolatrous sort of thing, or does it compete with the sacred?
The second commandment's a powerful thing, Jules. We're commanded twice to avoid idolatry. We cannot pronounce the name of Hashem, right? The name, and we have a reverence for beauty because ultimately it was created, right?
Right. I mean, the creation's all tied up with this, right?
You can't separate.
Part of it.
You can't separate. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I've never really given that much thought to how beauty relates to my faith. We just somehow jumped right into it. But, our notion of God in Judaism is so simple. I mean, the essence of it, the core of what God is really a simple thing for us. And if you believe in God in the Jewish sense, then you have to believe that beauty is a divine thing, that it comes from God, and that hopefully we are endowed as human beings with the ability to see it, to perceive it. And for me, among humans, that's one of the things that distinguishes one person from another, is how well a person can recognize the divine beauty in things, the divine order that lies beneath the surface, Plato's forms, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to be cynical and say that most people can't, right? You can stand in front of the Parthenon in Athens. Right. For me, the most perfect thing ever constructed, right? You can stand there and look at it for 5 hours and not see it. Other people experience a kind of a sublime awe. And even if they have no formal education, if they know nothing about Greece, there's something there that acts almost subliminally, and they just know that they're in the presence of some kind of greatness, some kind of truth. So, and that's a strange thing, right? If you believe, like myself, that beauty always exists, no matter what we see or think, it is there, rather than subjective in the eyes of the beholder, then that sets in motion a whole other series of beliefs. And it really conditions how you look at things and how you see things. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. Our second question is, what is aesthetics? And so you've already entered into that by saying standing in front of the Parthenon and seeing something, because aesthetics has a lot to do with perception. It's a bodily sensibility sort of thing, right? And oftentimes when we think beauty, we use the word so easily that I'm not sure it has any meaning at all for a lot of people.
Right.
Rather than this kind of awe-inspiring experience that you referred to, right? So we can talk about beauty and say, oh, that's beautiful and all that kind of stuff, but having that experience of beauty, at least from, preliminarily, is something profound for you then, right? It would be a profound experience.
It is, and we are now very desensitized because of the way society has evolved, especially in the last 150 years. So I can tell you, for example, the first artist whom we know by name was Imhotep, a builder of pyramids during the third dynasty of ancient Egypt. And this was a guy who was a member of the court of the pharaoh, who was priest of the sun god, and who was worshipped after he died. Temples were built to him, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's where art was when we can name the first artist. The first poet was a woman, whom we know by name anyway, Enheduanna. She lived probably about 50 years earlier in
Mm-hmm.
Mesopotamia. And so artists historically were revered. They were considered to be prophets in almost every civilization that we know of. And then when we get to the 1860s, this idea of the modern artist develops. In Paris, the art gallery is born. The idea of producing saleable objects for a voracious middle-class market. And then, of course, the advent of the computer and the bombardment by images of all types, from television, radio, everything. And now it's almost impossible to sort through it and even get yourself in the state of mind to even think about it, because we're so overwhelmed by images. I can tell you that in the Middle Ages, for example, if you lived in a village, somewhere in France, for example, and you would walk 5 miles to celebrate Mass on a Sunday, and you would enter a little church and you'd see the altarpiece glittering with gold, lit up with candles, Christ and Mary right there in front of you. That was about the most impressive thing you could see in your life, okay? And you would take that away with you after Mass. You might have seen the eyes of the Virgin Mary move. You might have been driven to prayer on a whole nother level simply because you were in the presence of this beautiful thing. But where are we today, right? I mean, how can we as moderns in the world of computers and the internet and just everything and modern art galleries, or the notion that an artist can learn to be one? Oh, I went and got a degree in art, therefore I'm an artist. No, you're not, right? So in any case, I think we've sort of lost our bearings. Kind of wandering here. I don't know if I'm answering your question.
No. To comment on the experience of some peasant folk actually walking miles and miles to get to a church service. Now it's the case we have such a huge tourist industry that you hop off your tour bus and you get your selfie and hop back on,
right,
and think you've gotten yourself with a beautiful picture, right? Captured this beautiful shot, right? And then it gets passed around, as a meme afterwards. And
what you were saying is a question that is similar to one in philosophy. And our show is Philosophic Dialogues from La Frontera, right? So the borders, and we'd like to look at what is different and similar between disciplines and our cities. So here's one similarity. If getting your degree in art does not make you an artist, what makes a person an artist? If getting a degree in philosophy doesn't necessarily make one a philosopher, what makes a philosopher? Who is a philosopher? Who is an artist?
An artist, I'm going to go out on a limb here and share with you my deepest beliefs. An artist is born an artist. You are born an artist. Artists are far more rare than anybody supposes. It's not even 1 in 10,000. It's 1 in 10 million or 100 million. There are a small number of them that walk the earth. They're prophets. They're sent by God to communicate truth and to express beauty. That's what an artist is for me. Nobody can convince me otherwise. It's taken me decades to really be convinced of this.
I have this other idea, this other theory about that, about art, in fact. And I think you're right. I think one has to be born with the right kinds of genetic, physiological attributes, and the kind of mental makeup that would allow one to become an artist. But I don't think an artist is an artist. I'm not sure anybody's born an artist, but someone doesn't become an artist until they actually produce art. I mean, there has to actually be the production of art, of an artwork. I mean, you can have the greatest, maybe artistic vision within you,
the talent,
but that doesn't make you an artist unless you actually do something with it. It's
right.
This kind of expression. So the expressionist part, an artist has to be able to express. what he or she has within himself.
An artist will do that because an artist is driven to do that. Even against his or her force of will, must be an artist. And then an artist will develop him or herself in some kind of medium, right? So you hear about precocious artists like Mozart, who's composing before 10 years old, Leonardo da Vinci, who already surpassed his master, Andrea del Verrocchio, as a young teen and was blowing everybody away with his talent. Michelangelo, Raphael, I could go on and on. Ultimately, it's one thing to mechanically make something, to learn how to paint and mix colors and apply the colors onto a panel or a wall.
Right.
But it's quite another to have the prophetic ability to communicate what God made you born to communicate.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds kind of heavy-handed, but I'll tell you something. You can walk through the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, which is the main painting museum in Tuscany, which documents everything from the late Middle Ages through the Baroque. And there's some paintings in there that just defy any explanation. You can stand in front of Leonardo da Vinci's Annunciation of 1472 that he painted when he was 20, his first solo work. And there you've got Gabriel, the archangel, kneeling before Mary, announcing to her with a gesture that she's going to give birth to the Son of God. And as I told you on the phone, even if you know nothing about painting, you know nothing about Catholicism, nothing about Italy, you can't help but be moved by the beauty of how Gabriel and Mary are painted, and the perspective and the color scheme and the composition. And then maybe you learn about the painting, and you learn about the meaning of the color red, which refers to the blood of Christ. Blue means purity. You learn about the symbolism of the cypress tree, which is associated with death, the future death of Christ, who has only just been conceived. And you learn about theology, and you learn about Leonardo da Vinci, and you learn about the entire context, because that's what art historians do. All we do is reconstruct context. That's what we do. You can spend a lifetime doing that, develop a deep appreciation for the object as a historical object, as a cultural object, as emblematic of the 15th century in Europe. And I would put it to you that that painting is beautiful, with a capital B. It expresses truth with a capital T. Leonardo is one of those people, okay? And luckily for humanity, he was able to not only express his vision, but we have objects from him that survive to the present day. Most artists live and die anonymously. Their work does not survive because there have always been artists, going back to the beginning of Homo sapiens. And so a lot of what we have left depends on archaeology or just the vicissitudes of history. In the case of Leonardo, we've got several dozen paintings and objects that we can point to and say, that's him. Some are better than others. But for me, these are expressions of just absolute beauty. I mean, just a direct expression of godliness. And I can't explain why. That's the hard part. How do I know that? Who am I to actually judge that thing and say that that is an artist and that was produced by an artist? That's the question that I cannot answer any more than I can answer, what is love? How do we remember? Just the most basic questions. And that's right up there at the very top of, why we're on earth, what is life, what is death.
That's what keeps us in business.
That's what keeps us in business. Why are there artists?
Philosophers.
But you've unloaded a lot of ideas on us here. The issue of appreciation, which doesn't come until further down.
I want to ask you the following question, right? I don't pretend to be an artist, but for those of us who are not artists or will ever come anywhere near being an artist, why is it important for us to think about beauty?
Why is it important for us to think about beauty?
As lowly people.
Well, can I, at the same time, can you think about this correlative question? Why is it important to think about beauty? And then why is it important to experience beauty? Like that person standing in front of the painting, will say, that's beautiful. That's an experience of beauty, right? But then there's the thinking of it, which is a reflection, right? reflective
for
activity.
us common lowly people to
Oh, we're all common lowly people.
to seek these experiences, to think about them. Why is that something worthwhile?
Well, I'm going to give you a personal answer, and I'll do my best with it here. Beauty reminds us that there is a divine order to things. It reminds us that we're not just walking molecules in plasma, that there is a good divine force, call it God. Beauty is an intimation of God, and therefore an intimation of truth. And through our direct contact with beauty, whether it's through a sunset or through an ingenious work of art, through something inspiring, we are in regular contact with the divine. And it reminds us of who we are and what our place is in this universe. I mean, you ask 10 art historians, you're going to get 10 different answers, right? But that's my strong feeling about it. And the language of artists as expressing the divine or creating objects that are an expression of the divine runs so deep in the Western tradition, not just in the Western tradition, but also in Eastern traditions. So, for example, Michelangelo, who many critics in the Renaissance thought was the greatest artist who ever lived, when he is described in biographies, he's compared to God. For example, the word terribile, terrible, is used to describe him. That's exactly the word that is used to describe God when he creates the universe in Genesis. He's terribile. He creates the world with terribilitas, with terribility. And you apply that language to describe artists. You elevate them up to the level of God himself. Those notions run strong and deep. And amazingly, those notions are shared by civilizations that are on the other end of the world too. In Buddhism and in other traditions, you have notions of the divine and aesthetic notions that are closely related to some of the things that come out of Plato and Western philosophy.
In experiences of beauty or in thinking about beauty, we get intimations of divine order. So what do you understand is this divine order? So what is the order about? What's the order that I get intimations of? That everything's put together with a purpose, or there's just this wonderful play of forms that we experience. So what's the order that you refer to?
It's a very interesting question. On this, I'm with the Buddhists, that we have to accept what we do not know. Or even Socrates, that the greatest wisdom is to understand that we don't know anything. I don't know the answer to that. In Judaism, we are commanded to obey exactly 613 laws. And Orthodox Jews spend their lives doing that. And some of the laws make sense, like wash your hands before you eat, because that protects you from bacteria.
Right.
They didn't know that 1,000 years ago, but it's true. Other laws, don't tie your shoes during the Sabbath, might not make sense, but they're followed anyway, whether or not we know that they have any sense or meaning. And so I can't know exactly why there is this order. I can't understand necessarily what it means, and I accept that. Right? We live in this interstice. We only are able to comprehend what's available to us. Our intellect can only take us so far.
I would like to ask you, I agree. I would like to ask you about quality and appreciation. How would you describe quality?
That's an elusive concept.
Tell me about it.
If you read Hume, you get into notions of taste, for example. Philosophers struggle with taste, with quality. How can we assess? Right? We're obsessed with that. But ultimately what we're trying to do is assess something or describe something or investigate or analyze something that cannot be described in words. Because how can you describe the divine? How can you define beauty? You can't do that any more than you can speak the name of God. I mean, it's, and that's just it, quality.
But we use it. right? I much rather drink fresh water than dirty water. This is of a higher quality. And so, no, I don't know God, but I can tell that something is of a higher quality than something else.
Right. It's an impossible thing, isn't it? I mean, why am I drawn to look at Leonardo da Vinci's Annunciation of 1472 rather than a Burger King on Mesa Street? Why would I rather spend time looking at that pattern of lights and images that comes through my nerves and into my brain than that over there? And honestly, I don't know how to answer that question. Maybe Jules has some insight.
What is quality, Jules?
Well, quality
How
is...
do you talk about quality?
I'm a phenomenologist, so I do qualitative research. It's
Tell me about
my
it.
area. And then we have to enter into the importance of developing our individual subjectivity. So each of us responds subjectively to different kinds of qualities. So in order to understand how we affect each other, we have to understand what's the quality of that experience. And those kinds of experiences then we use as models, or we use as, not even as models, but as events, because you mentioned about the Baroque church that's situated in a certain place, in a certain area, with certain artists who created this thing. And you don't just replicate that, right? It's a one-of-a-kind thing. So people go there because it's a one-of-a-kind qualitative experience. It's not replicable. And similarly, our human lives are one-of-a-kind, subjectively qualitative phenomena, right? And so to become the best of all possible humans, we want to cultivate this issue called quality. And I think that's tied into this dialogue we're having about beauty and aesthetics, because those kinds of experiences of beauty could happen once in a lifetime. This profound beauty, right?
Their uniqueness is important.
This unique importance, because we each have our own perspective, our own vision, our own ideas, right? And in order to develop that fully, we have to have these kinds of qualitative experiences, and they have to be rich and good ones in order to fully develop certain capacities in our humanity. And that's me going out on my phenomenological aesthetics limb, right?
Now, you make an interesting point. Anybody can buy a flat screen TV, plug it in, and look at it.
Right.
But not everybody can, cross over into Juarez and stand inside the mission church in Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe from 1662 and look at the vigas and smell it and touch the adobe and have that experience of something Spanish that's 350 years old, right?
That's right. I mean, that's what, Benjamin would call the auratic experience, right? The experience of aura, of something that is situated in a time and a space, and it comes out of a certain concatenation of human experiences, right? And artists bring those together. And an artist brings those histories, those influences together in this one unique way that an artist can, expresses it, and sometimes comes out beautiful works of art, or a series of beautiful works of art. You know a Michelangelo when you see one, right? If you've seen one, you can then begin to pick out the different works of Michelangelo or Leonardo or Monet or, these famous sorts of artists, right? Because they have a certain quality to them and they're distinctive. Yeah. They have a family resemblance, right?
But here's the clincher. Early on, I said that the artist is extremely rare. I'm suggesting that artists are born artists.
Yeah.
And that they develop their talents through one or more mediums, okay? Mm-hmm. And then you have another class of humanities, of humans. Dare I use the word class? I don't know.
Yeah.
If you're a Platonist, yes.
Right. Able to receive that vision with the equipment, mental, spiritual, to actually see that.
Yeah.
Okay. Those people are actually fairly rare too. Not as rare as the artist, but there aren't that many of them. Most people, you were talking about tourists, for example, will walk into the Pantheon in Rome, the only ancient building whose interior is absolutely conserved in all of Europe. Walk in there, when can I go shopping? Or I'd love to have another cappuccino, right? Others, formal education or not, will walk in there and just, they can't breathe. It's so beautiful and overwhelming and incredible on so many levels, and they might not even understand why. And so that's another thing that I can't really explain.
What makes someone appreciate something?
I think uniqueness has a lot to do with it, and newness. So I can tell you, for example, every summer I take 15 UTEP students to Rome. Most of those students have never left the borderlands. Some have never been on an aircraft, okay? After the trip, they arrive at Rome Airport, they get shuttled into the center of the city. I do not let them rest. They just drop off their bags. We get some water and a coffee and go for a walk. And we walk straight to the Capitoline Hill. I surprise them. You turn a corner and there's the view of the entire Roman Forum with the Palatine Hill, the Colosseum, the ruins of the temples and basilicas, the rostra where the emperor made his speeches, the Senate House. And almost every year they burst into tears. They burst into tears. Now, why would they burst into tears?
Because you're pushing them after a long plane ride.
Maybe that's it. Maybe they're just hungry.
They're jittery from coffee.
No, I'm telling
Italian coffee.
there's something there. And
It is a beautiful scene. I've experienced that myself. It's moving. It is moving.
Why is it moving?
It's an interesting experience. That architecturally, I think that there was something going on in the Roman phenomenon, and they were just master architects. I mean, they were just built beautiful buildings. There's that going on. They had new material to work with. The kinds of buildings they built, to demonstrate their political power, that's also bundled into there. The kind of life that they led, an ordered life. Right?
Yeah, there's all that, but then also Max curates that experience, right?
Yeah.
He is, after so many hours and the pilgrimage, if you will, right? You are presenting it to them in such a way, maybe just at a certain time of the day where the sun is shining in a certain way, right? And this one perspective that allows them to appreciate it. Obviously, if you went at night, it might not have been the same experience, or
Right.
you're curating that experience to help the appreciation part of it.
Right. Yeah, then I spend the rest of the summer filling in the context, teaching them all about it. We walk through the forum, we touch things, granite, marble, tile, and they smell it. You do things you cannot possibly do in a lecture room. We go into the catacombs, it smells like death there to this very day, And yeah, a lot of it has to do with the uniqueness of the experience, the newness of the experience. But I would suggest that there's something more as well. There's an intangible. And there is an intimation of beauty with a capital B there in those experiences that go beyond what you can describe as an experience.
Well, I would like to ask you about creativity. The role of creativity in beauty and in art. The formal question is, what is creativity, and is creativity an element of what is beautiful?
Creativity as an artist, because there are different kinds of creating. As a carpenter, I can create a building, or I can create a bathroom. But if you're talking about creativity in the sense of art, you are trying to create an intimation of the divine. You're aiming to express something that you cannot see except through what you're making, is what you're doing when you're creating an artwork. And that is something that most people cannot do, even after a lifetime of training. In fact, you can either do it or you can't. Okay? And my thinking is probably way out of kilter with your average person. I'll be accused of being elitist. What do you mean I'm not an artist? What, you don't think that's beautiful? Some might respond, well, there's art and then there's art, right? There's art that looks good on your wall. There's art that makes pleasant conversation over coffee in your parlor. There's art that leaves you breathless for a week as you think about what you just experienced looking at that thing. So I won't even argue that there are degrees of art. There either is or there isn't. You're either able to create in that sense or you're not. You know, and then you're either able to see that creation and appreciate it and absorb it and experience the divine by looking at it and coming into contact with it, or you're not. And maybe one of the greatest tragedies of humanity is that the vast majority of us can't see beauty anymore. We don't see it. It's all around us. We don't see it. It's everywhere. You've got the creation itself, the three of us looking at each other, nature, the sunset on the west side. But you also have the creation of our prophets, our artists. You know, I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Let me come back to the question. The question was, what is creativity, and is creativity an element of what is beautiful?
Creativity is the ability to intimate the beauty.
Well, let's get at this a different way. So I have a beautiful experience, and I can have an experience in nature, like of the sunset, right, on the west side or whatever, and the play of the colors and the landscape and everything working together, the form, even the smell, you know, the smell of the desert, all contributes to me turning to Kim perhaps and saying, isn't that beautiful? And asking for her approval or agreement, not approval, but agreement, right? Now, the creative part, the creation part is, so that's, if you're saying it's an experience of the divine, in that experience, then I can have an intimation of that. You know, that this could only have come from these forces working together in such a way. And isn't this an incredible experience of that, right? But then, when we talk about art, you know, Leonardo, Michelangelo, Monet, all these artists that we've mentioned, they're making something. It's not nature as such, but they're actually artificially making something, and they're creating these beautiful things, these beautiful objects, right? They're creating it. They're using their power to create, right? To create something beautiful, right?
Yeah.
That's, I guess, what Kim was getting at.
Right.
Is that right? Did I get it?
No, my mind was thinking about other stuff as you were speaking. I was thinking about those moments, right? But then it's so everyday. And so just an experience of those experiences that you're speaking of. One of those experiences for me, I experienced in this one city called Varanasi in India. They have a big party, a puja, every night. and it's very aesthetic. They have Brahmins who dance with fire, drums, music, a lot of incense, and so it's very, very aesthetic.
And a lot of singing.
It was my very first time there, and I had an experience. The thing is that they have this party every single night. And so I went back a few years later, and yet again, it happened again, right? But that's still out of the norm, you know. I'm not in India every night. So for me as an outsider, I can see why my mind was just blown away, because it's so different than my everyday night here in the desert. If beauty is everywhere, it's in this moment. It's in this very moment, right? And so why do we fail to appreciate the beauty of the present moment? Why do you think that happens to us?
I'm not. Did you went off to a different thing besides
In another
creation.
galaxy, I know.
Yeah, you went to a different
But,
galaxy, right?
why does the ordinary fail to be sublime
Well,
for most of us, as you point
most of us
out,
spend
right?
our existence distracted. And that's particularly true of Western societies today. We are constantly distracting ourselves and preventing ourselves from getting in a state of mind to see. Television, Instagram, anxiety, worries, waking up for work, drugs, alcohol, right? We're a society that distracts itself obsessively. And there aren't too many people, not too many Americans, for example, who will just take the time to go for a hike. Go hiking in El Paso. Trails are empty. They're empty, right? I hike all the time. Empty. Go to the art museum. Empty.
Yeah.
Right? It's true. I hate to say it. And I think that would be my initial response, that we distract ourselves and actively prevent ourselves from experiencing things like you experienced at the pujas in India.
Why do we distract ourselves?
Why do we distract ourselves?
Are we seeking beauty in a misguided way?
Well, I think most people are not seeking beauty. Most people are focused on very mundane things. How to earn a living, how to get food on the table, am I going to be promoted, you know, you know, what's on television tonight? Should I respond to this Instagram message now or after lunch, right?
Yeah,
So,
I would like to intervene here again, because our first two questions are on beauty, and that the first one's beauty, the second was aesthetics. And the distraction thing, or being on my cell phone, or going out to a party or whatever, they're all aesthetic experiences, broadly considered. And they're all giving me some level of pleasure, right? And so this is the danger that we're flirting with, or you're flirting with, Max. I'm not sure, because you're the Platonist in the in the group here. But there's these gradations of art. So there's gradations of experiences of pleasure, right? So the experience of beauty in this rarefied form is a really higher level of, yes, maybe I'm, speculating too esoterically, but would you say then this experience of beauty is this higher level that most humans are not born to be able to achieve, or they're incapable of achieving, or is this something that we should cultivate so more people could, or something like that? Yeah.
I do believe that artists are born artists.
Right.
And I do believe that the rest of us do have the equipment to see the art and experience the beauty. But most of us, per your suggestion, are distracted, or for some reason suffer from some kind of malady, spiritual or otherwise. We're not capable of doing that. And you're positing that there are different gradations, different levels of beauty and appreciation of beauty, right?
Yeah.
That's probably true. Plato, I think it's very interesting, has two alternate theories. In the Republic, he doesn't trust art. Mm-hmm. It's an imitation of an imitation. What is the artist doing? creating a sculpture of an athlete. And that sculpture itself is an imitation of a man who is an imperfect representation of the form of a man, right? That doesn't exist on Earth. And then in the symposium, embraces the view that I embrace, which is that artists are prophets. It's a much simpler, more direct view in this wonderful dialogue with Alcibiades and all the others when they're having dinner.
Leading us to climb the ladder.
Exactly. You know, the Greeks, I always come back to them, this divine order, this mathematical perfection that underlies all things. Pythagoras of Samos, who in the 6th century BC insists that humans are mathematical, that the very proportions among our limbs derives from math, that if you're going to make something beautiful, it has to be mathematical, like a temple, where every single proportion, every single aspect of the building is measured to the millimeter and inflected to be perfect and therefore beautiful and therefore virtuous and therefore worthy of the gods, right? And not to stress the point, but you know, how far did the Greeks, who for me really represent the Western tradition, go in their drive towards beauty and perfection? Well, look no further than the Pantheon, which we're still learning about, right? 25 centuries later. Yeah, it's made of Pentelic marble. Yeah, it's X number of columns long by wide. Here's the entablature. Here are the columns with base and capital resting on a stylobate. We can describe it. We understand the sculptural program. We understood that it symbolized the Greek victory over the Persians, and therefore the victory of civilization over barbarism and order over chaos, the triumph of the human mind. Sure, okay. Then we learned that it had optical refinements, that the Greeks, understanding the imperfections of our retina, could compensate for the shortcomings of our vision by inflecting the architecture, by introducing distortions into it so it would look perfect to us, right? The columns are closer together at the corners. The columns get wider towards the corners. There isn't a single straight line in the Parthenon. The entablature is curved. The stylobate is counter-curved. The columns lean in. And if you drew a ray through each column, those rays would converge 5,800 feet above the temple and come to a point, projecting the temple into the realm of Athena. They were just, they lived that, right? They were just right there, trying to penetrate that mystery all the time in everything that they did, philosophy, science, architecture. So where are we today? TikTok. I'm very cynical. I'm not very hopeful about where we are in terms of our understanding of beauty and where we're going with it.
No, you're very idealistic.
Yes.
But you know, to come back to the question of appreciation, I mean, you teach art history, right? And we teach intro to philosophy or intro to ethics. And there's reasons why we introduce our students to being reflective, to at least begin to move along that path, right? You're not cynical to the point where you've given up on teaching.
No, I'm not.
I'm not either.
Although there are many things about being a university professor that will make you cynical. You both know this.
Yes. But it's, you know, there's, I'm just, you know, I'm thinking.
But in spite of that.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking of this appreciation. I'm thinking of this appreciation issue, and why would an artist create a beautiful work of art other than to influence others? I mean, it is a beautiful thing that he creates or she creates.
This is an interesting question.
Yeah, I'm not sure that the influence is. The way that you seem to be putting it is that they can't help themselves but to do this. I don't think that they have so much of an audience. Maybe the Athenians with the Parthenon, but
no, I think it's. I don't think
we're trying to get inside the mind of the artist.
Yeah,
as lonely people.
Yeah, the issue of the beauty and the sublime, I think they're it's hard to even think about those things without the relationship of the artist to the viewer, the artist to the audience, or the artist to the history of the art having an effect on. It's not created in a vacuum. It's created with materials. It's created with ideas, right? These are all come out of our human experience. Now, from your perspective, Max, perhaps it's a divinely inspired, human experience, right? But nonetheless, it's a human experience.
Now you asked the question, what drives the artist?
Yeah.
Now, this is a very interesting question. Okay, so artists began signing their works for the first time in history, as far as we know, with the Greeks, where they identified themselves, and the culture of collecting art developed. And you weren't anybody unless you owned an Ezekias vase, for example. Artists, we know from documents, were driven by the desire for money, for glory, and in the Western tradition, to leave behind a legacy, to be remembered as great, right? These are things that drive the artist. If we read biographies that are written by non-artists, it's their impression of them. But ultimately, I would say that the artist, born an artist, is driven right down to the core by the need to make art, has no choice. How many artists are miserable that we read about in history, who commit suicide, who live miserable lives? Need I list them? Leonardo da Vinci was miserable, Baudelaire was miserable.
Just as many philosophers who get themselves killed and incarcerated.
Right. But it's an extraordinary number, right? It's not easy to be an artist, to be born with that vision, and to be almost commanded to live your life in a certain way, struggling with expressing that vision. And in many cases, it drives artists to madness and death.
Rosenzweig's theory about that is that an artist, to be a true artist, to express oneself as an art, has to give up a part of their humanity in order to become an artist. I have to sacrifice myself for my art, right? I can't pour myself into this work unless I sacrifice my normal relations with others, right? So there's some of that going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the very interesting things about artists, I mean, a lot of them are countercultural, of course, historically. A very high percentage are gay, very high percentage, which is very interesting. I mean, there's certain things that we just don't quite understand, and I'm not sure that we ever will. I mean, the artist is as mysterious as God, as far as I'm concerned. How is Leonardo able to make that Annunciation painting? I can't even answer the question. It's too awesome to even describe. And even people like Vasari. Vasari was the first art historian. In the 16th century, he wrote The Lives of the Artists, published it in 1550. And he was friends with Michelangelo. And he lists over 100 artists, describes their lives. Then he gets to Michelangelo, his friend, whom he considered to be the greatest artist he ever lives. And he spends 75 pages trying to explain how this man is a prophet of God, how, what makes him unique, what drives him. And you come away from that just thinking, my God, Vasari was confused. He couldn't even explain it.
This is an interesting chapter that could take a whole episode in itself, the artist as prophet. But, because in that tradition, in the prophet traditions, right, the prophets are saying something about how reality is. I mean, it's a very philosophical position, because then that saying how reality is has something to do with how reality becomes. That's the prophecy part, right? So, and the prophet's merit then is based upon whether or not what they said earlier in their life actually came true and developed, right?
Isaiah.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly. We only have a few minutes left. I would really love to have ended on your comment that the artist is mysterious as God. But do you have a question for us before we...
I have a question for you.
For us, yeah. We've been asking you, peppering you with questions.
What drove you to select this topic? Why are you interested in notions of beauty?
That's a great question. I don't know, it's a mystery to me. And it doesn't mean I'm equating myself to a prophet, an artist, or God, but do you want to respond?
Yeah, there's nothing, for me, there isn't anything mystical about it, actually. I love to think about stuff, being a philosopher, or at least having gotten a degree in philosophy. That may not make me a philosopher. I just feel that beauty is everywhere, and all of us appreciate. Personally, I believe that 180 from what you believe. I do believe that everybody is a philosopher. They may not get degrees in philosophy, but all of us ask the big questions from time to time. And all of us think about beauty from time to time, and all of us appreciate a variety of things. And so it could be a hot cup of coffee where I have my moment, or just seeing your son sleeping. Not necessarily a beautiful painting, right? And that's when you experience beauty. And so for me, I want to practically share the work that my colleagues are doing, and that their life's work connected with our viewers, and at the same time have our viewers engage with some of these experiences that people in academia spend their life doing, So for me, it's a little bit of all of that.
Let me ask you both one more question. Do I
Sure.
have time?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, go ahead.
Okay. I went to Berkeley as an undergrad, and I began as a scientist. I studied chemistry, physics, calculus, and hated it. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And then I went to Boston for a summer. I was 20 years old, 1987, and I took 2 art history courses. And these courses required us to go to museums, look at paintings. And I was in the Fogg Museum in 1987, July, and I looked at Van Gogh's self-portrait of 1888. There's Vincent with his red beard, looking like his head at 3/4 view, with this swirling green background, looking you right in the eye. And I looked at Vince, and he told me, change majors.
Mm-hmm.
It's time. I know that's crazy. I went back to Boston last month, and I saw the painting for the first time in 35 years. And there he was, giving me that same look. I kind of wanted to hit him in the face, okay, that he made me make that decision.
It's your fault.
It's all your fault, Vince. But what was the moment when you decided to dedicate yourselves to the study of philosophy? There must have been a cathartic moment.
That's a great
for
question.
me,
You're
it
looking
was,
in your breakfast cereal one morning.
No, for me, it was reading Friedrich Nietzsche, The Birth of Tragedy. I knew I have found my people.
In that book?
In the field of philosophy, with that book specifically, and then I read everything Nietzsche wrote, but to me it was, at the time, okay, I was 17, but at that time it was, yeah, you have found your people here. Like, these people think about what I'm thinking, and they're like, legitimate. Like, so I'm not wrong. There's others like me.
Right. Right.
Yeah, similarly, I was also a teenager when I came to philosophy, and I was on a pre-law track. And
I was pre-med.
I was pre-law, so my father, and it was the urging of my father. He wanted me to become a lawyer and help support him in his old age. But no, he would have been proud of me if I was a lawyer. But then I took a philosophy class, and it happened to be an existentialist class. And I started reading these philosophers, Pascal, Heidegger, Merleau-Ponty, Kant eventually. And I understood that, there's a way that we can think about being in the world that gives us direction. and helps us understand what we're doing in kind of really deep, meaningful ways. I just didn't want to just go ahead and, get into this business world, run-of-the-mill sort of thing, but I wanted to appreciate the life I was living and help other people to do that too. So
You didn't come to the same conclusion as Socrates, where
It
the
took
more
us,
you learn, the more you realize you don't know
It took us
anything.
student loans
no,
and
I've
many
always
years.
been anti-Socratic about that.
Really?
I think that he really was just pulling our leg because he knew a whole hell of a lot, right?
You think so?
Yeah, I do.
I kind of take him at his word through Plato.
Yeah. The other dictum that comes out of that, the unexamined life is not worth living, right?
Right.
So a life of self-study is a really good one. Anyway, we're at the end. This has been a wonderful dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you both.
And thank you
Thank
for
you.
sticking to your Platonic position.
Call me a
throughout.
contrarian or a Luddite.
Anyway, it was a wonderful dialogue.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us, and this has been Philosophic Dialogues from La Frontera with our guest, Dr. Max Grossman.
I'm Kim Diaz, EPCC Philosophy.
And I'm Jules Simon, philosopher at University of Texas, El Paso. Join us again next time.